In effect, Israel's offensive against Iran achieved what years of Gaza fighting could not: a broad realignment of Western support behind Israel.
Well, what stands out to me is that this is really the solidification of a clear trend, which is the nature of warfare. It's officially changed. What you see too is Iran's reaction is extremely old school. It's, we will send our missiles from our war chest. And it's,
We will get our regional players to attack you, even though they have no technology or real
yeah.
power. And I'll also say here that, to me, the biggest thing that this changes, that the Ukraine situation didn't change, is Iran was operating off of Cold War logic. It was build up less economically, less technologically developed regional allies.
Mm.
And if you have enough of these, that they will be able to assist you when you go to war, right? And what Israel is showing is those sorts of allies don't matter one lick.
Would you like to know more?
Hello, Simone. Today we are going to be asking the question, why did Israel decide to attack Iran right now? We are going to be looking at this within a few interesting contexts. One is when they did this attack, I was certain, because of how negative all the Western countries have been on them for the Gaza situation, that they've been generally almost unanimously positive about them, at least at the government level. Now, I'm not talking about the wokes. The wokes are going to screech no matter what. But at the government level, there's been a really surprising degree of like, yeah, just do your thing. We're not going to interrupt, whatever. Especially when the, inciting event was maybe less direct and less visceral if you're talking about reaching the public. Now, when you're talking about reaching the government and what all their secret services know, they had reason to be like, okay, maybe somebody else needs to handle this. The other thing that we're going to be talking about is what exactly they accomplished with this. We're going to be talking about who they took out, how they took them out, and what was the collateral damage of all this. Because I'm beginning to realize about this channel is that nobody else ever covers things as deeply as we do. Like, I'm always shocked. Like, I cannot find a single, we just yesterday did the Gaza article, and I was like, it was on the and I've never.
And I learned so much from it on the March to Gaza. Yes, that was amazing.
Why isn't the news? Why isn't there some news source I can go to that'll just have a good summary of everything? Right. But that's what we're going to be going over here, because it is important, especially in the context of what we just covered around Gaza. All right, so to give you an idea, because I think this is emblematic of where things are.
Yes.
So a few days ago, the Iranian wartime chief of staff was killed as a result of this. And so they replaced him with Allah Shadamini. He was killed 4 days after his appointment.
Ooh.
And then after that, the Israeli, like, I don't know, one of their talking voices for like the government came up and they said, we don't know who is under consideration next. With a very, like, the guy next to them gave a smile after that, like, because you'd be dead if we did.
And this sounds like the beginning of one of your isekai fiction books.
Yeah, that I write.
Where it's like, well, you're the fourth person we're bringing in. All the previous three died.
Then they go, we would advise them not to take the job. But if they do, we advise them to be extremely cautious.
Well, I can only imagine that Mossad knows in general enough to know who would be the logical next pick for a couple rungs down the ladder, right?
Yeah, but I also understand waiting until they take the job.
No,
just
sure, to not be a jerk. Yeah, to have some courtesy. But I imagine the more important thing is you have to know all these things ahead of time, because you have to know where they live. You have to know how to target their apartment. Like this homework has been done, which is what I find even more impressive.
So let's start with the homework.
Let's
talk
efficiency.
Curious. Israel's decapitation strike on Iran's military leadership. Some other recent things is they took out an entire research facility with everyone inside. They took out a high-tech centrifuge. A hacker group took out Iran's major banks' primary archives. And they've said that there are some operations that will be revealed Thursday and Friday that are going to make the quote-unquote beeper operation look simple. And the beeper operation is one of the most complicated operations in spy history by a dramatic margin. You can see our episode on that. So this is going to be big. Israel's surprise offensive wiped out a significant portion of Iran's military high command. In the early hours of June 13th, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion. Over 200 Israeli jets struck at least 100 targets across Iran in 5 waves. Among those killed were Major General Mohammad Bagheri, the chief of staff of Iran's armed forces, and General Hosseini Salami, commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. This is like their core other. It'd be like if they killed the head of the Navy and the head of the Army and the head of the Marines all in one day. Is
Wow.
what the equivalent is here. These two were Iran's most senior military officers. Bagheri, effectively the second most powerful figure in Iran's military hierarchy, and Salami, the head of the elite IRGC. The strikes also eliminated other top commanders: General Gholami Rashad, deputy of the Armed Forces commander; General Amar Ali Hazazadeh, head of the IRGC Aerospace Force; and at least 4 additional senior IRGC leaders. In total, Israeli attacks killed at least 20 Iranian military commanders, a quote-unquote stunning decapitation of Iran's defense leadership. And by the way, that stunning decapitation came from Reuters, which is otherwise a fairly progressive outlet.
Reuters. Yes. Okay.
Even a close advisor to Iran's supreme leader, Ali Shakamanani, was reportedly caught in a strike on Tehran's apartment block and gravely injured. The coordinated assassination campaign effectively gutted Iran's military leadership, mirroring Israel's previous elimination of Hezbollah's top command in Lebanon the year prior. Tehran swiftly appointed replacements. For example, IRGC General Adavahadi was named the successor to Salami, but the loss of so many seasoned leaders was a severe blow, and even since then, many of the successors have been killed. So the degree of, like, you can't imagine, imagine if in the United States, like, every top leader across every top department was gone, right, in one day. And people can be like, I've seen people be like, I'm not pro assassinations. Well, what are you, pro long drawn out wars? Like, are you would rather, instead of the generals who effed up and let it get to this point, be the ones who are disproportionately bearing the brunt of this, have it be the foot soldiers? And
Yeah,
if you're talking
seriously.
about Iran, the foot soldiers don't even want this that much. Like,
No.
Iran is one of the most westernized in terms of the average belief system of the population of the major Islamic countries. They do not have, at the level of the average citizen, the beliefs of their leadership.
Exactly. This is, I mean, people have all often fantasized about wars boiling down to hand-to-hand combat between leaders. Like, this is as close to the dream as I think practically we can get, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think Iran is also like one of those countries. I wouldn't say it's like fully westernized. I think it's more like your average Turkish citizen or something. Like, they're Muslim, but they're not like, Wahhabist. They're not like a Gazan. They're not like an Egyptian. They're more like moderated. So I would say, like, Iran is a very, if you want to understand what the country is actually like, it's an interesting situation where it's almost as if you have a pseudo democracy that is under the control of a theocratic Islamic government with a moderate population. But if you want to get an understanding of how moderate that population might be, you can look at our episode called, I think it's something like Iran, the Secular Theocracy, where we talk about how common secular beliefs are within Iran and how common even Islamic beliefs are within Iran.
Right. That was a while ago, but it was good.
Yeah. And this is why I'm saying, like, the funny thing about all this is that the Jews may save the Iranian people from a fascist dictatorship. That would be effing wild if that happened.
Well, and it does seem, I mean, even when you just look at their inability to improve birth rates, the Iranian government is failing its people systematically.
It's completely feckless. Yeah.
Yeah, like a regime change, which kind of is the major upside of this, if like Israel gets its reach goal, like that would be good for them too.
Would work there. I think that they should probably revert back to the old monarchy, and the old, the rightful king right now has been talking a lot on this. He said that the Ayatollah ran to his caves like a rat. People need to come up and retake their country.
We have words. We have spicy words.
Well, no, I mean, I think that within different regions with different cultural proclivities, in some regions monarchies work better, and in some regions democracies work better.
No, absolutely. Well, and also I think when you're in a region experiencing crisis, Sometimes going from crisis to democracy doesn't work out that well.
Yeah.
Right away.
But we'll get into the monarchy and all this history and everything as well, because one mistake that I've heard from a lot of people that just is a complete ignorance of the situation is this actually from Asmongold, and we'll get into this a lot later. He says that he didn't think that Iran would still hate America if America wasn't allied with Israel. And I'm like, actually, buddy, based on the evidence we have, Iran hates Israel because Israel is allied with America and America is allied with Saudi Arabia, and that they have repeatedly shown openness to normalizing relationships with Israel if only America would turn against Saudi Arabia. But we'll get to that. I know I was talking with an AI about this, and he goes, well, you've got to remember that they're a theocratic government. And I'm like, yeah, but their form of Islam is not as conservative as Wahhabism. And apparently the Saudis can find a way to normalize things with Israel. And it's like, actually, that's a really good point. Probably not for theological reasons. But we'll get into the geopolitics of the region in a bit later. I want to get into the facts. The reason I'm getting into geopolitics later is if like you're broadly educated, you know this geopolitics stuff. I want to start with the stuff that I wouldn't know because the news is not covering this comprehensively.
Right.
Extensive strikes on nuclear and military sites. Beyond personnel, Israel's strikes aimed to cripple Iran's strategic capabilities. The raids targeted key nuclear facilities, most notably the Natanz uranium enrichment complex, Iran's largest nuclear site. Multiple explosions rocketed Natanz, and satellite imagery confirmed heavy damage to critical infrastructure. The electrical power substation was destroyed, and an above-ground centrifuge was blasted. The UN nuclear watchdog chief, Rafael Ghazi, informed the UN Security Council that Natanz's above-ground pilot enrichment plant had been, quote-unquote, destroyed. And again, that's from Reuters. Though Iran's underground enrichment halls remained intact. Israel also struck the deep underground Fordow enrichment facility, causing limited damage as Israel lacks the bunker busters to crack the mountain. And Nuclear Research Center Isfahan.
Keep this in, man.
In addition, Israeli missiles hit Iran's ballistic missile infrastructure. For example, an underground missile depot in Kermanshah near the Iraq border was bombed. Missile production and launch sites such as Bid Kahani complex and air defense batteries were also targeted. So a lot of the missiles you're seeing now come out of Iran, and prematurely a lot of these were taken out. So you're already seeing a fairly limited capacity. And one of the things we're going to look at is why did Iran's missile output decline so quickly?
So in other words, what you're saying is not only is Israel like, okay, we're going to end this progress toward nukes, which has just hit this point of
we're going to kill anyone involved in this, anyone involved in your military. Yes.
Well, and also we're going to anticipate retaliatory attacks and try to undermine the infrastructure associated with that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
In Tehran itself, dozens of sites were struck, including military installations and even the defense military headquarters. By the third day of operations, Israeli claimed over 80 targets in Tehran alone had been hit, from nuclear weapons project labs to fuel depots, triggering massive fireballs at fuel storage facility in Sharem district. These widespread strikes across Iran's geography demonstrated Israel's intent to dismantle Iran's nuclear program and missile arsenal comprehensively, not just deliver a symbolic blow. And I think that this is really important. What's happening here isn't they are like, we are going to cut your balls off. We are going to completely neuter you so you can't do anything for 20 years. That was the goal of this. And they might have achieved that. We will discuss the extent of the damage and in Iran's current situation right now. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed the campaign would continue for as many days as it takes to remove this threat, framing it as essential to Israel's survival. A note here that wasn't mentioned here is another way that Israel has done its attacks is actually very similar to what Ukraine did with the drones that targeted Russia.
Right, like moving things in piecemeal, like in suitcases and in
yes,
trucks.
There's been a lot of drones. I think hundreds or thousands of drones moved in piecemeal into Iran in suitcases, in parts that have been reconstructed within the country and have been used in these attacks to keep things very targeted. Now, I should note, Israel doesn't do targeted in the way the U.S. does targeted. When the U.S. does targeted, they mean we're going to try to not kill any civilians. When Israel does targeted, it means we don't really care that much about killing civilians, but we won't kill any unnecessary people in terms of killing the exact people we want to kill. But like if they're at their apartment, that apartment's gone. If they're at a whatever, that's gone. Like we don't care, right? And I actually think that in the long run, this will lead to lower civilian casualties, because if you look at, what things like Hamas has ended up doing is putting babies, putting daycares, putting kids right next to sites because they think that they can use that to deter Israel. And it has led to a lot of these people dying. And I think that's really horrible. And if you just learn that Israel doesn't care about that, then you're not going to play that gambit anymore.
Yeah.
Civilian toll and collateral damage in Iran. A firefighter calls out for colleagues at the site of a blast in Tehran residential compound after an Israeli strike on June 13th, 2025. Dozens of civilians were killed when missiles hit an apartment block during the strikes, and that's from The Guardian. Despite Israel's focus on military targets, the offensive has inflicted heavy civilian toll in Iran. Iranian authorities said the first day's strike killed at least 80 people and wounded 320. But again, that's Iranian authorities, and that's Al Jazeera. And if they're saying, and I would note how small that is compared to what Israel accomplished, killed 80 people. This is Al Jazeera, an anti-Israel newspaper. Keep in mind, it's by Qatar, Qatar.
Right. They're going to go for the higher range of damage in this case.
No, they will intentionally manipulate. Qatar is the primary donor, even more than Iran, to Hamas. Iran is only a larger donor if you include the cost of goods like weapons and stuff that they're sending.
Or like training weapons. That's a lot.
Al Jazeera is their mouthpiece, okay? They are firmly allied with Iran, was in this against the Saudi Arabian power structure in the UAE and everything like that. We'll get to all this in a little bit. The point being is a source that is basically Iranian state TV, Al Jazeera, mixed with the Iranian government, said only 80 civilians died on the first day.
Yeah, that is really impressive.
Astonishing.
Yeah.
And I would say that, okay, well then what's the real number? Probably 20. And if I go with, okay, if the real number is probably 20, because I'm just saying, like, how much would a state newspaper lie? You're talking about like North Korea style state newspapers here. Okay, so if the real number is probably 20, and for 20 people, they potentially shut down like a nuclear site and retaliation, that's huge.
That is, especially considering the damage caused by nuclear weapons. So that's, yeah.
Yeah. And Al Jazeera here argues that 20 of those killed were children. But again, this is Al Jazeera, which is basically, Islamist state news, and not normal Islamists, the Iranian side, not the Wahhabis. They would say anything mean about the Wahhabis that they want because they hate them. But we'll get into that little conflict in a second. In Tehran, some missiles struck residential areas while targeting regime figures. One strike leveled a high-rise apartment building in the Farahazad neighborhood, killing around 60 civilians in that single incident, according to Iranian claims. Well, that's more than a lot of the other things. So did almost everyone die in one incident? Over several days, as Israeli raids continued, the cumulative human costs mounted. By June 15th, the independent human rights org, activist news agency Harana, tallied at least 406 people killed in Iran and another 654 injured. Again, those are incredibly low numbers given the scale of what's being accomplished here. These figures suggest that for each high-profile general or nuclear scientist eliminated, many Iranian civilians have been caught in the crossfire, whether from errant missiles, strikes, or dual-use infrastructure or secondary explosion. Iran's government has blasted Israel for what it calls deliberate attacks on civilian areas, though Israel insists any civilian harm was unintentional. Israel knows when they're bombing a civilian apartment complex where they know a scientist is, civilians are going to be harmed. But Iran, it's rich that they say this. Well, in response, they just send waves and waves of unguided dummy missiles. How dare you sometimes kill the people who live in the same apartment building as our nuclear scientist who wants to wipe your people off the planet? We will send wave after dummy missile for this injustice. But like, I get it. What else are they supposed to do? They don't have access. They've already used all their guided missiles, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we'll be painting a picture of how far in a corner Iran is painted right now. And I really don't blame them for this. I just am a little annoyed with the hypocrisy. Still, scenes of rescuers pulling wounded families from collapsed homes in Tehran underscore the blistering attacks come at a painful price for Iranian society. Now, Iran's fragility before the onslaught. Ironically, Israel's hammer blow landed at a time when Iran was already weakened and in a fragile state, both domestically and in its regional posture. Economically, Iran had been reeling under renewed U.S. maximum pressure sanctions and internal mismanagement. By 2025, the country was mired in its worst economic crisis in 40 years, with soaring inflation and fuel shortages. The economic pain had translated into public frustration and sporadic protests, threatening the regime's stability even before the first Israeli missile fell. International Atomic Agency, IAEA, reports of Iran's nuclear noncompliance had Iran facing the possibility of harsher sanctions and diplomatic isolation. Meanwhile, Iran's regional influence had been eroding. Over the past year, Tehran's network of proxy forces, its chief mechanism for projecting power, suffered devastating setbacks. In late 2024, Iran's ally in Damascus, the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, was overthrown, removing a cornerstone of Iran's axis of resistance. Around the same time, Israel waged major campaigns against Iran-aligned militants on Israel's borders. Hezbollah in Lebanon was decapitated, with its longtime leader Hassan Nasrallah reportedly assassinated, and its fighting capabilities shattered. And you can see our video on the pager attack, which was just absolutely devastating. But we go over it as a strategy for applying to jobs. But the devastating nature of the attack and the brilliance of it really cannot be overstated, because it basically took out all of Hezbollah, which is crazy. So they've taken out Hezbollah. Hamas is not a useful ally to Iran anymore. And now the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad is overthrown. Basically, Iran built out this network of allies in the region, which are all sort of like, if you played Command and Conquer, it's like the extended GLA network. It was the Muslims who just wanted to kill other people, not the ones who wanted like some sort of regional stability and ability to work with the outside world, which is what you see with the Saudi Arabia aligned forces, right? Even though they're actually more conservative and more conservative Muslim, they're more like the resistance. And these guys are more like, well, we're more conservative, but we're going to, go with the status quo. Okay. And I won't say I hate that. I kind of like the whole resistance thing. I like playing the GLA and Command and Conquer. No, I will share a short clip to give you an idea of what I mean by they are basically the modern GLA faction. But I must warn you before sharing it that, back in the 2000s, video game companies were very, very politically correct. So you're going to have to brace yourself for this.
We must be on our guard. Reports say the GLA might attack as revenge for our entering the war.
They're my favorite faction by an enormous margin. By like 80%, I just play the GLA. If anyone knows what I'm talking about, I'm a big fan.
Unit lost.
Unit lost.
A warrior has fallen.
But what I'm saying here is in terms of like global stability and everything like that, I get where they were going with this, but they sort of made themselves an enemy of everyone except for global agitants at the same time. And with Russia tied down and everyone else who is interested in global agitation, like North Korea, et cetera, tied down because Russia is tied down, Iran, allowed its sort of agents, the Hezbollah, the Hamas, the Syrian guy, to sort of be left out on a limb. And Israel just took the opportunity to I wouldn't even say Israel, it was more Mossad, to just cut those strings one by one by one. And once all those strings were cut, they targeted the thing that was funding all of that,
Right.
which is first Iran. And they probably won't go after Qatar, if I'm going to be honest. But this is I wonder if Qatar is going to rethink their situation because they've lost pretty much all of their supporters if Iran ends up undergoing any sort of political realignment. Although I don't think
Well,
that's the real goal.
Is Qatar's endgame different from that of Iran? I mean, I think so, right? I mean,
Well, Qatar was sort of okay. So we're going to go on a brief tangent here about my understanding of what's happening in the region. And I call them Qatar because I'm an American, and that's a real word. And Qatar sounds lame. Anyway, so Qatar was, if anything, sort of in like a pride fight with the UAE, almost more than it was the various regional forces. And the UAE had allied themselves with the Saudi Arabian and American factions. And so Qatar almost like reflexively aligned themselves with Iran, but I don't think they ever really had a serious like foot in the game or anything like that. I don't think they cared that much. And so I think a lot of this is just they're gonna give up pretty quickly. Like they're gonna be like, okay, well, those minions died. Let's see where we can reorient ourselves, because otherwise they're not like that big a power player except for the money they have.
Well, what confuses me about them is that they also invest a lot in reputational things with the West. You know, like Iran isn't trying to like bring in Western tourism and engage other like Western thought leaders. And
yeah, but they're not doing it successfully.
Qatar
They're not like
isn't?
the UAE. Contrast them. Contrast Dubai. And do you know any city in Qatar's name?
Doha.
Okay, Doha. Yeah, because we might be doing a thing there soon.
Well, also, like, you know, Doha's in Qatar, but I don't know any other cities, to be fair, but I don't know other cities, and aside from like major cities and capitals in other Middle Eastern countries either, because we don't do much work there. And if I don't do work somewhere, this is how it is for most people, then I'm probably not going to remember what I at one point memorized. So lame. But I mean,
I guess the point I'm making is from Qatar's perspective, it's like all their minions were killed. They don't particularly, I don't know if they care that much. It's like, okay, well, that particular card hand didn't play out because they haven't actually burned bridges with the West that much for whatever reason.
Well, no, and they seem to be trying to invest in being a world player in various economic and cultural and intellectual spheres.
Well, then they
like
might
sports too, and with conventions too. Like I think that's like some anime stuff that's happened there.
Yeah, they might view this as like a useful cutting of the strings in. They might be like, oh, this is fantastic. Now we don't need to appeal to those crazy people anymore.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is and I'm speaking, of course, from immense ignorance about what's really going on in the area, but Iran seems like this really unstable mean girl who has like this troop of like, she's a rich mean girl, or at least a mean girl who like spends all of her family's money. So maybe they aren't actually that rich, but she like forces her parents to go into credit card debt for her. And she just spends all this money on her flunkies, and her flunkies cause a lot of problems and bully other people and are really unstable. And now she's being pistol whipped by someone else at school.
What? Who already like beat up all her flunkies?
Yeah, like caught her, who like kind of was nice to her, or like sometimes helped out her flunkies too. Maybe out of like protection, or maybe out of like, yeah, I mean, I also don't like the people that you're bullying that much. It may now just be like, oh, I'm not going to hitch myself to this losing.
Yeah, wagon. No, that's sort of the impression I get is Qatar might be the person who walked into the room and is like the very wealthy aristocratic girl, and is like, and she sees this other girl who she saw as like her friend just absolutely being beaten with like the back of a gun, and she's like, whoa, I didn't know that could happen. I'm walking out of the room right now. Like, you guys have fun with that little game. I don't know this person. And then Qatar walks in and it's like, hey girls, how's it? Oh, whoa. And just like slowly turns around, hoping she hasn't noticed, and starts walking back out of the room.
Yeah, but I mean, Iran has really been asking for it too. Like, just by, I mean, the fact that Iran was being sanctioned for crossing the line with developing nuclear weapons. I think it was getting to this point where Iran was like, what are you going to do? What are you
No,
gonna do?
well, I
Come
mean,
at
The
me?
Daily Show is so funny. The Daily Show did this piece where they show Netanyahu talking over and over again throughout history about how Iran is getting close to crossing the line. And he's
Mhm.
like, you see, like, this is all fake. I was like, imagine if I showed him like environmentalist scientists saying over and over again how close we are. I'm like, oh, that's proof environmental issues aren't an issue. You know, global warming isn't an issue. He'd be like, whoa, it is an issue there. You know, they were just, and I'm like, no, actually, it isn't an issue there because we never actually made any big. They kept saying, well, if you do this and if you do this, then it won't be an issue and we can delay it. But we never accomplished any of those things the environmentalist advocates said. But Israel kept saying, well, you know, we can slow them down 10 years. And then they do like Stuxnet, if you're not familiar with that, was this amazing program where they like absolutely screwed up. Really amazing. So they jumped the Iranian like air gapped computers using like USB sticks that they like left outside the
I think in a
Iranian
parking
facility.
lot, right?
And then they plugged it into the internal computer system to like see what's on it. And then it slowly went through and it sped up the turbine to the point where it destroyed all
Burned
their
out.
machinery.
Yeah.
And
So
they
smart.
couldn't be fixed. You know, they had to start
Yeah.
from scratch after this.
Yeah.
So absolutely brilliant, by the way, especially in terms of a no death way to, you know, slow this down. But what we kept seeing with Israel is they kept slowing down Iran through things that we can like measure. Like this is why they kept delaying the timeline. And they finally got to a point where I think we'll get into a lot of this in a second, but I think they sort of got to the point of like, nobody cares. You know, most of the Western powers right now at least want Iran out of the scene, especially with what's going on in Russia right now. And
Mhm.
Iran's, you know, tacit alliance with Russia. You know, they don't want them to have nuclear weapons any more than we do. And we're already in this incredible negative public perception around Gaza right now. And, you know, Iran's in this incredibly weak position because we just took out every single one of their major surrogates.
Mhm. Yeah.
In an ironic way, it was the Gaza protesters that sort of led to this because they put Israel in a position where everyone who was going to turn against them for trying to protect themselves had already turned against them. And there was no one else who could possibly turn against them for that reason. And yet those within Western positions of power who wanted them to take out a threat to also them, because Gaza wasn't really that much of a threat to any of the Western players, but Iran was. It was really only a net benefit for them to go and do this because of the protesters. Gaza,
We came for their friends, and then we came for their internal infrastructure. We came for their leaders. There's a chilling effect too with anyone else who might take a position of leadership. Because
well, I mean, it's not just that. Trump recently is like, oh, we could take out the supreme leader. We've just decided not to, which I love as well. He's like, you know, we've decided not to for now, I think is what he said.
Oh, Trump.
That's very Trump. Anyway. In Gaza, the Hamas militant faction backed by Iran was decimated during a 2-year war following its October 2023 attacks. So we're again talking about their various, you know, people who follow them. With Hezbollah and Hamas neutralized and the Syrian corridor disputed, Iran found itself strategically isolated, its deterrent reach blunted. Even Iran's attempts to retaliate indirectly, for example, via Yemen's Houthi rebels, have been constrained by prior US and Israeli actions. In short, by June 2025, Iran was strategically and economically brittle. The fragility likely influenced Israel's timing, as RAND analysts note. Israel perceived a quote unquote closing window of opportunity, having quote dealt significant blows to Iran's proxy network, end quote, and seeing Iran's regional position as its weakest. The Iranian regime, for its part, was aware of its precarious position. In May, Iran's Secretary Council, ironically chaired by General Bagheri, who would soon be killed, met to harden defenses against a potential US and Israeli strike. Yet those preparations proved inefficient to prevent Israel's onslaught. The confluence of internal economic stressors and external losses left Iran ill prepared to absorb the massive attack that followed, adding to fears in Tehran that the regime's very survival could be at stake. Now we're going to talk about the weird phenomenon we've seen of Westerners supporting this. A striking aspect of this conflict is the largely supportive reaction of Western governments to Israel's attack on Iran. And this has even been noted in a New York Times piece I read today, where they're like, why are all the Western governments so supportive of this?
Okay.
A sharp contrast to the wary critical stance during Israel's war on Gaza. Within hours of the strikes, leaders in the UK, France, Germany, and other Western nations openly affirmed Israel's right to self-defense against Iran's nuclear threat. France's President Emmanuel Macron even blamed Iran for destabilizing the region, noting Tehran was enriching uranium to near weapons grade with no civilian rationale. And I note here, by the way, that Iran was in the middle of talks about this with Israel, right? So I'm not, just to take the other side of this, it wasn't like there weren't like ongoing talks. Within the next week, they were supposed to be finalizing things. And then all these attacks happen, and everyone who was a participant to those talks are like, this is for the best. So I think it shows what their spy networks were saying about whatever Iran was doing on the other side of this, because these countries have informants as well, right? Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced he was deploying combat aircraft to the Middle East in a show of solidarity with Israelis' defense. Keep in mind, this is the UK after all. So Macron is like, oh, and then the UK, those big pussies, are actually sending military aircraft. Imagine them doing
That's
that around
intense.
Gaza, right?
But I think, I mean, everyone recognizes the threat of a new country coming online with nuclear. The fact that Mossad...
Well, no, it's very different than any other country coming online with nuclear, because Russia or North Korea comes online with nuclear, and your fear is them using it defensively and it lowering your ability to maneuver geopolitically. Iran is the first country with nuclear that might just use it the moment they get it.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So your point is like,
They
it's
might
one thing
just
for them to have it for signaling reasons. It's another thing to have it for like, they're gonna kill
theological and
you.
ideological reasons.
Yeah. Okay.
And honestly, they might use it on Saudi Arabia before they use it on Israel. You know, they you know, we'll get to that in a second, but like Iran might send missiles flying, and that makes them very different than other countries. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz likewise declared that, quote, Israel has the right to defend its existence. Iran's nuclear program is an existential threat, end quote. You know, all these countries, when Gaza happened, they were like, what are you doing, you terrible Nazis? And now they're like, oh, well, I mean, Iran is different. You can handle them in the background if you want. What's really happening here, just in case people are wondering, is all of these countries wanted Iran really defanged. You know, they wanted every one of Iran's teeth ripped out. Israel's doing that. Israel's paying for it. Israel's taking the blame for it. And the rest of Europe is like, you go ahead and do that. Whatever you want to do. Like, I might get mad at you later. We might allow our citizens to protest this. And I think that this shows that this is not warmongering, right? When every single other major powers that do not like Israel in many cases, are immediately like, oh, well, in this one instance, just
I can't resist.
And we'll talk about this later. If anything, it is decreased the pressure that they were placing on Israel for Gaza, which I think is really interesting, and I didn't expect at all.
You mean you think at this point right now, because of the distraction posed by Iran?
No, not by the distraction. It's Germany, France, the UK, the US less, because the US is already pro-Israel, but the European powers, right? They were avidly against Israel, what Israel was doing in Gaza, right?
Yeah.
But now they're in this situation where it's like, I know we were complaining about that thing you were doing in Gaza, right? But I wouldn't want to distract you with our complaints until you're done with this Iran thing. Then we can revisit the Gaza situation, is sort of where they are right now.
I see.
At least at the government level.
Okay, interesting.
Which I think says to people, you got to ask yourself, what do these governments know that you don't, that despite their rabidly often anti-Israeli perspective, they feel this way about Iran?
Yeah, that is big. That is big.
I didn't expect them to feel this way. And this was actually a shock to me, where it revealed to me that intelligence services knew something about Iran that I didn't know. I didn't think that they were this potentially threatening to all of these countries. This unified Western stance is especially remarkable given that these same leaders had just weeks before been sharply critical of Israel's conduct in Gaza. During the Gaza campaign, European allies grew alarmed at the humanitarian toll on Palestinian civilians. In fact, in the lead up to the Iran strikes, Germany was considering an unprecedented weapons export ban on Israel. France had curtailed off an Israeli arms expo display, and the UK suspended trade talks, all in protest of Israel's bombardment of Gaza and impediments to the humanitarian aid. So why the about face on Iran? fundamentally Western powers' view of Iran's regime as a far more dangerous and unambiguous threat to global security than Hamas in Gaza. As one analysis put it, Gaza by late 2024 looked like a mad active collective punishment on an enfeebled population, eroding Western sympathy. Iran, by contrast, is a large hostile state, a theocracy on the threshold of nuclear power that has openly sworn to destroy Israel. In other words, Western capitals see Iran as an existential menace, not just to Israel, but to regional stability, especially.
Well, also, like what we talked about with our discussion of the March on Gaza, in many cases, it's very difficult to help Palestinians because of what Iran continues to do in making Palestinians radicalized and violent and weaponized. Like,
and I
a
think
lot of the
what we're
reason why
seeing
we're not
here-
able to help them more is because of Iran's ongoing use of them as a cudgel. It's horrible.
No, and I think what we're seeing here is Israel wouldn't have felt comfortable going after Iran like this if it hadn't first handled this, if it hadn't first handled Hezbollah. And that it can do this because if it did this while those two other factors who are basically like Iran surrogates were still at play, then they just attack Israel. Right? Like it can go after this because it handled those. And the other major capitals and power players didn't see the wider logic at play here. Especially given Iran's ballistic missiles and its military alliance with Russia, which is waging war with Ukraine. Moreover, just one day before Israel's attack, UN nuclear inspectors reported Iran was closer than ever to a bomb, violating the Non-Proliferation Treaty, a red line for Europe's big three, who are staunch defenders of the NPT regime. Now, I note here that this happened one day before they started to attack. I bet Israel knew all this, and they were just waiting for that report to come out or the inspectors to go through and then be like, okay, now we attack. But Iran apparently didn't care about all the treaties. You know, the UN thought, oh, they care about these. Oh, they're not playing game. They're not playing game. And Israel's entire civilization was at risk as a result of this. And what a lot of people, I think this recontextualizes what's happening in Gaza right now. To this is the goons being taken out. Now they're taking out Command Cobra. This isn't the putties anymore. Facing that reality, London, Paris, and Berlin all signed approval of Israelis' preventative strikes to stop an Iranian bomb. Wow, London, Paris, and Berlin all signed approval. Their emphasis was on Iran's own heavy responsibility for the conflict due to Tehran's nuclear escalation. And I note this for anyone who says, warmonger, clearly not. Everyone else is like, oh, actually, that's why you were doing all this stuff in Gaza? Well, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, go ahead. You go right on ahead and get rid of that Iranian problem we all have in the back of our necks.
Notably, I think a lot of people see the writing on the wall of what happens when Iran continues with what they're obviously choosing to continue doing. I think that's the scary thing.
Well, I love Trump's response to this, which is he tweets, I'm not in the mood for negotiation. Wow. You know, that's a very thing to say. Very Trump, you know. In effect, Israel's offensive against Iran achieved what years of Gaza fighting could not: a broad realignment of Western support behind Israel, at least in the short term. Western leaders still verbally call for de-escalation to avoid a bigger war, but they have largely refrained from the harsh condemnations and sanction threats that accompanied Gaza. The difference comes down to strategic self-interest. Stopping nuclear proliferation and checking a Russian-aligned adversary takes precedence for the West, whereas Israel's punitive operations in Gaza raised uncomfortable moral and legal questions. And I note that I don't really see them as punitive myself. I see them as necessary for Israeli safety, but okay. I mean, maybe less necessary once Iran is taken out. Once Iran is taken out, you don't need these same types of operations in places like Gaza anymore because they're not as much of a threat anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd also note the almost disgusting hypocrisy on display here, which is to say that Gaza was unique in that Gaza was really only a threat to the Israeli people. The UK, France, Germany didn't have to worry about Gazans kidnapping their people, breaking into their cities. And so when Israel was trying to defang Gaza, they were like, oh, you horrible, horrible Jews. But then the moment they came for a tiger that could attack them, they were like, oh, well, you know, in this case, In this case, what you're doing is necessary. It wasn't that Gaza was toothless, it's just that it was toothless against them, so they took the opportunity to score political points with their, wokies who act like no one actually ever attacks anyone or is a threat to anyone else. Iran's counterattacks and their decline. So I want to talk about what happened with this as well. Iran's response to Israeli onset was swift but ultimately limited in duration and effect. Within hours of being struck, Iran unleashed a barrage of missiles and drones aiming at Israeli cities and military targets. Iran state media claimed hundreds of ballistic missiles were launched at Israel following the attack on Natanz and killing of its generals. For several nights, missile salvos rained down on Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and other areas. So many at times, Iran's nightly missile attacks overwhelmed Israel's anti-air defenses, penetrating the dome shield. Israeli officials reported intensive barrages. Apartment blocks in Tel Aviv and Ramat Gan suffered direct hits, resulting in significant damage and fires. In Israel, air raid sirens became a nightly routine, and citizens huddled in bomb shelters as interceptor rockets streaked overhead. Iranian missiles that evaded interception did cause casualties. At least 24 Israelis were killed in the first wave of retaliation, and dozens more were injured. One long-range missile even reached the West Bank, landing in Hebron, a testament to Iran's ability to strike across the region. However, after the initial fury of the first few days, Iran's direct counterattacks noticeably tapered off. By middle of the conflict's first week, the volume of missile fire from Iran had diminished. Several factors explain why Iran's retaliation died down so much after the early salvos. Preemptive suppression. Israel's opening strikes specifically targeted Iran's retaliatory capacity. In the first 48 hours, Israel's forces struck many of Iran's missile launch sites and air defense systems. Israel reportedly destroyed dozens of radars and surface-to-air missile launchers across Iran. It also hit surface-to-surface missile launchers that Iran was using to fire on Israeli cities. This degradation of Iran's launch platforms and targeting networks likely blunted Iran's ability to sustain heavy missile fire. Simply put, some of Iran's guns were knocked out early. Limited arsenal or caution. While Iran possessed thousands of missiles on paper, it may have held back from expending its full arsenal. Firing large volleys risked depleting Iran's strategic missiles without achieving decisive effect. Most were being intercepted or striking civilian areas, which can backfire diplomatically. Tehran might be conserving missiles in the case the war drags on or the US becomes involved. I really don't believe that at all. I think they sent everything they had, and I think that they're lying about how many missiles they had, and we're seeing that already. I mean, why wouldn't you hit with everything? Really, they can't use these dumb missiles to fight back against the US. They can't use these dumb missiles to fight against a land invasion. They're really only useful for terror attacks against civilian populations. Loss of command and coordination. The decapitation of Iran's military leadership likely caused chaos in Iran's defensive operations, with top generals and the IRGC commanders killed in the opening strike. Iran's response in the immediate aftermath may have been uncoordinated. Except why is it decreasing more the more they get new people in positions? Could be trying to reserve ammunition, but I doubt it. I think they're just running out. Proxy retaliation fizzled. Iran initially signaled that its regional proxies would join the fight. For instance, a missile was fired from Yemen by the Iran-allied Houthi militia landing in the West Bank. But Iran's usual proxy options were largely unavailable or weakened. Hezbollah and Hamas, traditionally Tehran's frontline retaliatory tools, had been badly damaged and offered little firepower in this round. Some rockets from militias in Syria and Iraq may have been attempted, but with Assad gone and pro-Iranian militias scattered, these fronts were muted. The lack of a proxy second front meant Iran stood relatively alone, unable to sustain a multi-front assault on Israel. Without significant proxy attacks to complement its own missiles, Iran's offensive potential was more easily contained. I just can't imagine how bad that felt for Iran being like, okay, guys, we've been giving you missiles for years. You should have hundreds of thousands of stockpile. And Hezbollah's like, yeah, we have no leadership anymore. And Hamas is like, well, actually, we're completely under. And the Houthis are like, actually, we were mostly destroyed and our stocks were seized. Ouch. Ouch. You got to almost feel bad for them at this point. In summary, Iran's counterattack was intense but short-lived. It caused real pain in Israel, dozens dead, hundreds wounded, and daily disruption of life, but it failed to alter the strategic balance or slow Israel's campaign?
Well, what stands out to me is that, one, this is really the solidification and confirmation of a clear trend, which is the nature of warfare is, it's here. It's officially changed. We still have aircraft carriers, but now we have people taking suitcases and trucks into enemy territory and doing this sort of new form of guerrilla warfare, like Amazon Prime delivery warfare, like a piecemeal, IKEA furniture assembly warfare. And I think that's really interesting. What you see too is Iran's reaction is extremely old school. It's, we will send our missiles from our war chest. And
we will get our regional players to attack you, even though they have no technology or real power.
Yeah. And I think, what you can see, I think Mossad is kind of the trend setter. Also, like Ukraine to a great extent too, out of necessity and creativity, of what the future of warfare is going to look like, which is where Mossad, I think, really represents what the future of warfare is going to be, especially with AI, is that it's going to be smart. And by the time it's happening, it will pretty much strategically be over. It's checkmate before you realize.
This was checkmate in move one. And I'll also say here that, to me, the biggest thing that this changes, that the Ukraine situation didn't change, is Iran was operating off of Cold War logic. It was build up less economically, less technologically developed regional allies. And if you have enough of these, that they will be able to assist you when you go to war against one of the other big, powers, right? And what Israel is showing is those sorts of allies don't matter one lick. If you look at the Cold War, we tried to build up allies in Vietnam, we tried to build up allies in Korea, we tried to build up allies all over the world, right? Like, that's what all these conflicts were about. And we fought over these allies, right? Like, hundreds of thousands, millions of Americans died over these allies, right? And what we're seeing in this new ecosystem is those types of allies don't matter at all. And that's what Israel showed, that one little country can wipe out every one of those allies you care about. And that the only allies that matter are the ones who are technologically capable.
Yeah.
And this is why I also say it's useful for the United States to invest in its relationship with Israel, because of the technologically capable and economically productive countries. It is the only one with an above replacement fertility rate, which means it's one of the only ones that's going to matter, intergenerationally speaking.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think that this could be a huge opportunity for Iran. Like, if they experience a regime change, at least we get to roll the dice again for Iran, where I feel like we are at a point of multi-dimensional failure here. We're at a point of religious failure, as you covered. They're not, like, they're having a crisis of faith. We're seeing huge detraction from Islam in practice in Iran. We're seeing declining birth rates. We're seeing what seems to be a fairly unhappy populace, and now an unstable government. Like, let's give it another roll of the dice. Like, maybe we can save Iran. I think I saw someone post something like, Cyrus freed the Jews, now the Jews will free the Persians. Like, they're gonna pay it forward, or no, pay it back, return the favor, delayed. And maybe, that's true. And I don't think that Israel or Jews ever wanted, like, animosity toward Islam in general, or Muslims,
what I will say, that the Jews should now go to Saudi Arabia and say, money, please. We got rid of your geopolitical rival. Money, please. And if Saudi Arabia doesn't go to them, they need to go, as I've said, even though Turkey has said anti-Semitic stuff in the past, I know people think that they would never be friends, but I actually think Turkey is the number one desirable ally in the region for Israel long-term. You got to go to Israel and be like, hey, let's be friends. You got those great Bayraktars. They're also fairly technologically competent, also a diversified economy. But we'll see. Also, they don't know how to manage money. Look at their banking system right now. Just be like, you need a few Jews. You need someone who can handle usury. Just put all this in on us. We'll go back to a medieval system here. But anyway, to continue here. Is Iran spent now, or does Tehran have any cards left? With its generals gone, its nuclear sites burning, and its missile offensive petering out, Observers are asking whether Iran has effectively been spent as a fighting force in this conflict, and what options remain for the Islamic Republic. There is no doubt that Iran has taken a severe beating. The war so far has left Iran's military badly decapitated and its strategic program set back by years. Yet it would be premature to count Iran out entirely. The Iranian regime still has significant cards left to play, though each comes with high risks. Missile reserves. Iran likely still holds a vast reserve of missile and rockets. U.S. analysts estimate Iran holds thousands of missiles capable of striking Israel. If cornered, Iran could choose to launch larger salvos and more advanced missiles in future rounds of fighting. I don't believe that. I just don't. They'd be
I just
sending them
think they're
already.
out. One, because a lot of that infrastructure was attacked by Israel.
Yeah, the where that stuff was stored was attacked on day one. That's why they ran out so quickly.
Yeah.
Asymmetric warfare. Iran excels in irregular tactics. Even as its conventional options narrow, Tehran could turn to cyber attacks, covert sabotage, and global terrorism as a way to hit back. Iran or proxy hackers might try to disrupt Israeli infrastructure or Western financial systems. Iran operatives could attempt attacks on Israel or Jewish targets abroad. Past incidents like the 1990s Buenos Aires bombings linked to Hezbollah show Iran's willingness to use terror as a pressure tool. Already, there are concerns that Iranian agents could target Israeli embassies or soft targets in third countries in retaliation. Such shadowy responses don't win battles, but they keep Iran in the game by raising the cost for Israel and its supporters in a deniable way. I don't see that as mattering either. Israel doesn't care about your dumb terrorist attacks. They're not like the US where like we panic because you blew up a bus. Like Israel's used to that stuff and they're basically carrying this out on their own. You can try to attack like US and French buses, but that's just going to galvanize them more to be pro-Israel because they don't even see themselves as in this fight right now. So it would be incredibly stupid. Like Israel has done a really smart maneuver by not asking for help from other players because it just allows Iran to potentially try to do terrorism on them and then force them into Israel's hands. Maritime front. Iran could threaten the vital oil shipping lanes of the Persian Gulf, specifically the Strait of Hormuz, which is what we've heard about a lot recently, through which a large share of the world's oil transits. The IRGC Navy could harass or attack tankers or lay mines, creating a global economic shock. This oil weapon is a classic card Iran holds. Indeed, oil prices spiked after the war began on a fear Iran might widen the conflict to the Gulf. Though so far no major incident at sea has occurred. Because again, Iran doesn't want to draw in other players. Right now it's them versus Israel. If they widen it there, it's them versus everyone.
Yeah, and no one actually wants them to get nuclear weapons. No one wants that.
Well, I mean, if they choke Hormuz, the U.S. is going to get involved immediately. At least within that context. And the problem is, and what they know now from what's happening in Russia, is their big battleships are basically pointless from the perspective of modern warfare. Russians were taken down by AI-controlled jet skis with bombs attached to them. Like, there's very little you can do. Again, when you look at the cost of these big giant ships. You buy a few hundred jet skis, you're talking like 0.000000001% to like strap them with bombs in an AI. You could send out a whole swarm and there's nothing they can do. Eventually they're going down. And it basically means that these are all just paper tigers for them, right? Like they can't actually blockade the strait. Yeah. And I'm sure the U.S. would love to try out some of its new weapons that it has built with inspiration from the Ukrainian war.
Yeah.
Really? No, honestly, this is so funny. If Iran does try to blockade with these legacy weapons that they have, like these big old battle cruisers, it's like every weapons testing company right now is like drooling for them to do that so they can use their weapons to show how awesome they are on basically a feckless and incompetent and witless enemy to be like, look, we can blow up a few battleships. Why don't you buy from target.ai? Proxy military resurgence. While Iran's main proxies are down, they are not entirely out. Remnants of Hezbollah, not really. Iraqi Shias militias, I mean, kind of. Or the Houthis in Yemen, oh, come on, could be activated in a more coordinated way if Iran chooses.
They've been pulling out all the stops for a while now. I mean, at some point you're going to get worn down.
Yeah, for example, the Houthis have already signaled readiness to strike Israel or even shipping targets on Iran's behalf. In Iraq, Iran linked militias could target US bases, as they have occasionally done in the past, trying to complicate America's posture. No, that would just cause America to become involved. You don't want that. You don't want us to be more involved than we are, especially with Trump saying that. But look, okay, so I should explain why America getting involved matters so much. Israel, as it is said, cannot hit the underground labs where nuclear weapons are being refined or developed right now. America easily can, because we have the types of jets that can carry bunker buster bombs, and Israel doesn't. They don't have the bombs, they don't have the jets.
Like, that's the thing.
They should, but we do, and we've got a lot of them. They're basically infinite amount from a global perspective. I don't care how under a mountain you are, that mountain will be dust if you piss us off enough. Next, diplomatic leverage. Russia and China. No, I'm not even going to read that. That's pointless. Russia and China are not coming to save you, Iran.
No.
I'm sorry. Russia is heavily involved in its own war right now. And China is right now looking to go to war with, like, the Taiwan. They do not want to waste a bunch of forces on your dumb instigation.
That's fair. And they don't necessarily benefit from Iran going off, making things.
No, but Russia and China are actually going to be put on a significant back foot because of this. If Iran is dealt with as well as their entire axis of supporters, Russia and China have lost a major geopolitical ally in the region, and basically it moves the entire Middle East, at least the parts of it that matter, into the United States' hands.
Wow.
In a big way.
Well, then aren't you arguing that they have a really good reason to get into this?
Who has a reason? No, they've got no reason. I mean, they've got a reason, like, technically, but, like, not actually on, like, no one would decide it, even though they know they're going to lose a lot of power because of it.
Like, the amount of power that they'll lose in the region is not worth the risk that they take on by getting involved.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
I mean, keep in mind, if Russia cannot get involved, so it's really just a question of China. If China attempts to get involved, they will make a lifelong enemy of the Saudis. China does not want to make a lifelong enemy of the Saudis. They would prefer to stay neutral as all of this plays out. That is one thing the Chinese don't want to do at this point. And the Saudis have likely already communicated that to them. They're like, let it play out, I'm sure. And I'm pretty sure the Saudis, when you look at their diplomatic network, have a lot more people close to people in position of power in China than the Iranians do.
Yeah, fair.
Despite these remaining options, Iran's overall position is extremely precarious. Tehran's supreme leader is definitely rejected any notion of surrender, stating Iran will continue to resist impositions of peace on unfavorable terms. But resisting is not the same as prevailing. The chances of Iran's regime surviving this crisis depend on a few critical variables. If the war stays limited to airstrikes and missile exchanges, Iran's clerical leadership might endure by brutally repressing dissent at home and rallying national sentiment against a foreign enemy. In fact, some Iranians, even regime critics, may unify in the face of an external attack, at least temporarily, which could shore up the regime, as happened during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. On the other hand, the regime's legitimacy is already eroding, and a humiliating military defeat could spark intense anger. The severe economic strain, coupled with public shock of seeing iconic generals killed and key sites in flames, might embolden opposition factions. If street protests were to explode again, as they did in 2022, the Revolutionary Guards may be too overstretched or demoralized to contain them. In a worst-case scenario for Tehran, the combination of military decapitation and popular uprising could threaten the country of the Islamic Republic. Now, I just wanted to go to the thing I talked about at the beginning here, because I think it's really important to go over, because I was so disappointed in Esbegold's historical knowledge, where he's like, Iran calls America the Great Satan, or at least calls it still the Great Satan, because of our alliance with Israel. And I was like, that is not true. If anything, it's hostile to Israel because of us. So first, Why did Iran start calling us the Great Satan? It was because we led a coup to overthrow a democratic elected government and try to reinstate a monarch. And the 1953 CIA-backed coup that overthrew democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh and reinstated the Shah is the core historical grievance that led to this anti-US ideology. The term Great Satan was coined after the 1979 revolution, but it draws moral legitimacy from this particular event. Now, Iran has showed itself open, as I mentioned, Iran in the past has shown itself open to actually normalizing relationships with Israel and the United States. I pointed out that it cares much, much more about Saudi Arabia than it cares about us or Israel. We are distant afterthoughts in its mind compared to Saudi Arabia. Everything it does to Israel, it does to shore up support among its subordinates, and we'll get to why that's important to them. But Israel doesn't matter, and its subordinates don't matter if Saudi Arabia can be checked.
Oh, so if they had some other means of feeling not threatened by Saudi Arabia, you think they'd just drop all this?
Absolutely. And they've signaled it in the past. So in the past, they've shown themselves open to normalizing relations with both Israel and the U.S., specifically in 1986 during the Iran-Contra affair, quiet cooperation between the U.S. behind the scenes. In 2001 to 2003, post 9/11, Iran cooperated with the U.S. against the Taliban and offered a grand bargain to normalize ties. The Bush administration ignored it. 2013 to 2015, GCPOA era, under President Rouhani, real diplomatic engagement with the U.S. hints at a pragmatic regional realignment. So this isn't like a one-time thing. It's something they wanted over and over and over and over again. This isn't a flight of fancy of one ruler or anything like that. Iran does not care about Israel in the same way that, like, they care a little bit in terms of how it makes them look as a regional power player. Same way that, like, you know, Saudi Arabia does or Egypt does. But at the end of the day, like as we showed with the Gaza march, like the Egyptian government cares so little about the public perception compared to like their own safety when it comes to Gaza. They're just like, yeah, okay, like maybe 96% of people support it. Whatever. You're not getting through. So Iran does not hate us because of our alliance with Israel. It hates us because of our alliance with Saudi Arabia, and it hates Israel because they align with us. That's one of the reasons. I will note they do dislike them for religious reasons in the same way Saudis dislike them for religious reasons. But apparently that's very overcomable for a lot of Muslims, especially wealthy Muslims, as I've found in my history. Wealthy Muslims are very quick to forgive the Jews when they start having to do finance and business interactions. In fact, I don't know any. I have a lot of Muslim friends, and I don't know any of them who have an ounce of anti-Semitism in them. But it's because, you know, they've got lots of Jewish financial friends. It's really, I know that's a horrible stereotype, but that's why they're like, hey, I know all my Jews from work. You know, what are you talking about? Now, here I would note something. Iran's 1979 revolution established a Shia theocracy defined in opposition to Western imperialism and quote unquote Zionism. Hating Israel became a core part of the regime's identity. So a revolutionary posture against what they call the quote unquote Western colonial project. And they're not wrong. There is a Western colonial project in the region. I understand why they would. I've actually been on Iran state TV a number of times. That may surprise people. Talking about
when?
Yeah.
Yes, actually. Sorry, all those random interviews you've done. Yes.
Yes, I've done interviews where I rail against the urban monoculture and I wail against Western cultural imperialism, and they love it because in that way our views are aligned. But, you know, and I'm not like doing this for money or something. You know, you guys know me. I hate the urban monoculture. I'm like, yeah, you're right. They shouldn't be trying to force their weird, you know, like, you know, colonist flag, which is what we call the progress pride flag, values on you guys. Like, you guys, that's not your culture. You don't need to obey them. But what's notable here is if you look at the Saudi coalition versus the Iranian coalition, they both built their coalition on different things. The Saudis both built it on economics, religious similarities, and a sort of pragmatism. And I'm going to put a map on screen here so you can see it of the Iranian, the quote unquote axis of resistance. This is Hezbollah, Assad, and Iraqi militias, right? Okay. But then you've also got obviously the daddy warbucks of it all, which is Qatar. which to me always seemed like the odd one out, but whatever. And on this map, you can see the dark red is Iran, the dark blue is Saudi Arabia, light blue is Saudi Arabia's allies, and light red is Iran's allies.
Okay.
And then you've got the neutral ones, right? And then we're going to go to the next one here, which is the GDP per capita of each of these countries.
Oh.
And so I'll put them both on screen here so you can see them next to each other. But what you will see is, largely speaking, the Saudi Arabian allies have a high GDP per capita, and the Iranian allies have a low GDP per capita. You look at something like Saudi Arabia, 32.9 thousand per year, UAE, 49.6 thousand per year. Let's look at the Iranian allies. Well, Iran itself is 5K per year. Yemen is $465 per year. Oh. We've got, who else do we have? Iraq, 5.9K per year. We've got Syria. We don't even know what that is. Yeah. Like it's not good. Well, we've got it. Hold on. We got it.
Well, this is, again, I just feel like there's this mean girl dynamic where in many cases, Iran is preying upon populations that kind of can't say no to the money and the support. But then those populations are being further ruined, degraded, made dangerous and radicalized, and not more economically productive by this support. And it's really screwed up.
And the final thing I'll note here is for those who are like, well, I don't want a ground war with this region. Don't worry, you're not going to get one.
Well, and I think the whole thing is ground wars
are a thing of the past. We gain nothing from grabbing territory in Iran. This isn't like historical battles that we've seen where it's like we want to occupy, because after the success of McCarthyism, that's what we call General McCarthy, right? And he rebuilt all the countries that we destroyed in the Second World War, whether it was Germany or Japan, et cetera. And everyone was like, oh, you could just rebuild countries. That's great. Let's rebuild them into great Western allies. And then we were, well, that really only worked because we were dealing with countries like Germany and Japan. You can't do that with a country like Iraq. You can't do that with a country like Afghanistan. You can't do that with a country like, actually you maybe can with a country like Iran, but generally, they're like, we're not going to try, And so you don't have this belief anymore. Now it's just about, let's beat them into the dirt because they've got nothing we want. And they will beat them down so hard that they won't stand up again for a long time. Maybe they can restructure the country themselves in their own way, but we're not going to get involved. And it's not just, Israel has no desire to control Iran, like no desire. They have no desire to put on the ground. They just wanted them to pay attention to their darn sanctions. And they weren't going to do that without being spanked.
There you have it, basically.
And so right now, I'm sort of shocked that we're in this timeline, but I will say that the world is a dramatically safer place this week than it was 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. Things felt hopeless with Iran for so long because there was so much flip-flopping around how they were dealt with geopolitically that it got to the point where, kind of like with a kid that was not punished or shown consistent discipline. We essentially trained Iran like, nothing's really gonna happen if you just keep going, like, go ahead, what are we gonna do? Maybe we'll change our mind, maybe we won't sanction you as much, maybe we'll release funds to you. So it felt so hopeless, like they had learned that they could just go ahead, and Israel very strategically put its foot down in another one of those brilliant strategic moves that clearly involved years of planning and
likely prevented a larger conflict in the region.
I wonder, I used to be under the impression that the United States government was doing things like this, and maybe they are, but now I'm starting to doubt that because Mossad keeps doing things like this and it comes out and you see, and it's like, whoa, I can't believe that you built these fake companies and distributed these pagers.
The entire network of Hezbollah.
And we just don't hear about any amazing coups.
Well, no, it's because our intelligence services have been completely taken over by the woke mind virus, as we keep seeing and hearing. They are completely ineffective now and just dedicated to spreading wokeness.
Yeah, maybe. I would like to think that we are doing cool things like that.
No, they look, they've done great things. Hey, Simone, they tried to assassinate Donald Trump twice already, that in just the past couple of years. That's pretty impressive. 2 attempted assassination attempts against a presidential candidate, and they still haven't been shut down. Come on.
Yeah. Well, there was this. You should probably take this out. I don't know. I need to double check it. You should probably double check it. But I have like a news alert for Dan Driscoll because I want to see what he's up to, my Secretary of the Army. And there was this
He's one of our friends. Anyway, continue.
News article that came out that was like, yeah, in this interview he was doing just randomly, he mentioned that he'd just spoken on the phone with someone on the Army who was on the moon. And then he quickly changed the subject.
Wait, what?
I know. And so I was like,
I just want that to be a troll. I want it to not be
I know.
real.
Like, so like, yeah, there are 2 really great scenarios in this. Like there are 3 outcomes here, right? Like one is just, this was misunderstood, or he's really sleep deprived and like meant to say something else. Like on the moon project, like a project, to bring us back to the moon, like it was not articulated correctly and he's been under a lot of stress. The other scenario is it's true and he accidentally slipped it. And the other scenario is that he's trolling. And those are 2 both almost equally amazing scenarios. Like the trolling is fantastic.
I could be Secretary of the Army, so I'd be like, oh God, I was just on the call with the aliens. And oh, sorry, I meant like illegal aliens. The illegal alien.
Troll.
Yeah.
Yeah. But sorry, I mean, like so the random things like that make me sometimes think like, oh, maybe, I mean, no, sorry, considering all the money we have.
This is the way you lay it out. You got to be like, oh God, sorry. I spent all day being berated by the aliens and the illegal aliens. You got to have it in a way where it wouldn't make sense unless you meant it in the first way. And I just practiced that all day getting ready for this.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. But I mean, it's clear to me that even if the United States government can't get its act together to do really cool things like this now, I do think that at least, hopefully, a sufficient proportion of the US government is going to adopt AI, and AI will start doing cool things like this, even if we can't. So hopefully we'll shape up. But I do feel a little humiliated and embarrassed that we're not pulling off really cool things like Mossad is.
Well, the US would never we have never, ever tried to the way that they're going into this is like, let's just bomb this country into the dirt. That's not the way the US does things these days. And it is the way we should do things going forward.
It is. You don't want to protract. You don't want to have a lot of people on the ground. You don't. And I mean, also like, there's so much more collateral damage when you have this.
Yeah, but what I also like about the way they're doing it is bombing them into the dirt is the wrong word. They're not like firebombing them or anything like that.
No, they're strategically taking them out.
Yeah, they're strategically taking out every aspect of the country that they don't like without focusing on the industry or anything like that. And I think that is really what we should be doing in wars going forward. That is what a war should look like. When we have our automated drone swarms, they shouldn't go in and kill some, just like every civilian. They should go in and we should be like, okay, eliminate this person, this person, this person, this person, and destroy all these buildings.
Yeah, well, and I mean, what I think we will see over time is there will also be, just like how, like sort of the Russian way is some kind of strategic poison or nerve agent. We'll see more strategic, genetically targeted poisons and stuff that like literally is, made for this one person based on a DNA sample we picked up from their visit at this one conference. And, they'll be taken out that way, or they'll be taken out by drones, like you said. But yeah, warfare is different. And it's really interesting to see the asymmetric warfare taking place now of like old school versus new school and how it's playing out. But yeah, I mean, I don't like any sort of conflict or innocent people are dying. All of this is horrible. But at the same time, when I think about the untold suffering that may very well have been prevented by this action, I'm just thrilled because it's very scary what Iran has been doing. So thanks for the detailed.
Is that not the most detailed breakdown you've heard yet so far?
Yeah. I mean, well, because all we're getting, and I mean, especially in the media too, there's a lot of people that want to make Israel look bad. They want to make the US look bad for its involvement. They're only talking very myopically about, well, this US official said this, and like the US doesn't seem to be aligned on its reaction to this. And like that kind of reporting doesn't matter. Who cares?
Or they'll be like, oh, this person died or this person died. It's like, you don't hear it all at once. You're not.
Yeah, and like,
wow.
What does it mean strategically for the country? And like, what is the bigger picture here? And what's going to happen with allies in the region? So Yeah, the high school clique dynamics of the Middle East shifting. Who's going to be the new queen bee? Who knows?
Oh,
We shall see.
as I've told you, it's Turkey.
It's Turkey. Turkey, eh?
Turkey, eh?
Turkey.
All right, Simone, it is, well, and obviously Israel is going to be way more important after this.
They've shown that if you come at them, they may wait a while. They may take some hits.
Yeah, they're ready.
But they're like that nerd that you bully in high school who eventually you wish you never even encountered them.
No, it reminds me of the nerd from the Billy Madison or whatever, where he has the list of everyone he plans to eventually kill, like a complete psycho. I'm like, I know Israel has one of those lists somewhere. They're like the dwarves. I always joke about that, like with the Book of Grudges, which I always thought was probably like an anti-Semitic stereotype.
Our enemies, cowards, hiding in the deepest, darkest places. Fools. Every wrong is recorded. Every slight against us. Page after page. One wrong put right. But the great Book of Grudges remains full.
Like, anyway, love you to death, Simone.
Love you too.
Do you want to try to do one more episode or not?
I do. I love talking.
All right, I got another one ready. Send the one on who's funding No Kings.
I already did. I have the weirdest pregnancy craving for bananas and peanut butter. So I've just been knocking them back. And I think I knocked back a few too many.
I was the same this morning when you gave me, because I'm beginning to feel better, the big slushie.
Oh, yeah.
So, giant. And I'm like, I don't need dinner. That was too much.
Yeah, well, we're both. I mean, at least it's moderately healthy foods. So that's good.
I mean, I don't want to eat only healthy foods. I feel like I can drink beer again, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, I mean, at least you can drink again.
After days of sipping on titty juice.
Poor thing. I don't know how you survived that.
Milk. I drink milk primarily when I'm feeling sick.
Just funny. I don't know. When I was raised, I was sort of told by my parents that.
Oh, there's this weird, like, magical thinking thing where people think that milk leads to more mucus, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
It's like actually one of the better things you can drink when you're sick.
Sympathetic magic nonsense.
Yeah, it's sympathetic because it looks like mucus.
It does not look like mucus. Milk does not look like mucus.
No, people look at it and they're like, this looks like what could create mucus, right? Like it's a thick biological liquid. And so they think, oh, you drink a lot of this thick, creamy biological liquid, you're going to create more thick, creamy biological liquid. But the reality is that milk is actually fairly well nutritionally balanced in terms of giving you a lot of what you need if you're otherwise queasy and you can't keep down solid foods. I mean, it's not everything, but it's a lot of it.
It's great. Yeah, I'm of the opinion that it is fantastic.
Okay, you buttheads, what's happening?
It's right there. You see?
How'd you get up there?
I was doing something. He was jumping so high up, and then he hit the roof. Climbed up here. Yes, you wanted me to go. He wanted me to go down. I keep wanting you to come down.
Stay away. I'm gonna get you down.
I look at your butt crack.
Stop it.
I'm looking at your butt crack.
Stop it and go to bed. Go to bed. Go to bed. Go to bed. You guys sharing a bed? You go to bed, okay? Or I have to send you back to your room, okay? You gotta be calm, okay? Can you do that?